I want to say something about the topic. It says military artists in California during the Mexican War. These are soldiers who have come out to Alta California, not as artists, but as soldiers. But it just so happened that they are talented artists, and they sketched and made paintings of things that they saw, people that they saw, landscapes, etc. They weren't assigned to do this. They did this on their own. So keep that in mind as you are listening to the tales of William Myers, William Rich Hutton, and Alfred Sully.
Yes, as Rosemary said, we have three people. The first one we're going to talk about is William Myers, and as you can see from his self-portrait there, he did have something of a sense of humor. Myers, of the three people that we're going to be talking about, Myers is the one that we actually know least about. We know that he was born in Philadelphia in February of 1815, but we really don't know very much about his youth. He probably, from the little snippets of his writing, probably served in the Merchant Marine before 1841, because at one point he alludes to being in Rio de Janeiro. But what he does is he enrolls in the Navy, first as an enlisted man, and then he worked as a civilian in the Washington Navy Yard, and then he was appointed to the rank of gunner. And in November of 1841, he began a 3-year cruise in the Pacific Ocean on the bark Cyane. Now, he was a member of the Cyane was a member of the United States Pacific Squadron, which was commanded by Thomas Catesby Jones. And during this time, Myers compiled a detailed journal with over 100 full-page watercolors of the places and the people that he saw as he was voyaging around the Pacific. But for our purposes, the thing that's the most memorable is he was on the boat when Commodore Jones, who was in Peru at the time, which is where the U.S. fleet was stationed in Callao in Peru, and Jones heard word, wrongly of course, but he heard that war had broken out between the United States and Mexico. And as commander of the Pacific Fleet, he had standing orders that in case war broke out, he was to go to California and occupy it. And that's what he did. And he headed straight to Monterey. And in October 1842, he arrived there and took possession of the port of Monterey.
Now, Myers' participation in Commodore Jones's ill-advised seizure of Monterey on October 20th, 1842, rendered this eyewitness painting of the landing. The day before, on October 19th, Myers, who kept a fantastic journal, wrote the following: "Stiff breezes, land in sight, filling grape and musket balls for 9-pounder. We are now approaching Monterey in the territory of Mexico, the enemy of our country, whose flag it is our duty to strike and hoist our own in its place, together with a few spangled banners, eagles, glory, and soldiers. So it appears we're going to have a fight. Bueno." So I think he's starting to learn a little bit of Spanish. Now, the Cyane was at anchor in Monterey for considerable periods of time in November 1842 and again in the spring of 1843. In his journal, Myers writes of hunting wildfowl on the surface of this lagoon near Monterey.
Myers was also in California, both in Alta and Baja California, during the Mexican War in the Pacific from 1846 to 1847. He participated in a number of engagements. You know, as far as Alta California was concerned, the war was basically initiated by the American Navy, and a whole bunch of ships occupied quickly Monterey and San Francisco. Then they took over Los Angeles. And you can see that there was, from this picture from the squadron that was anchored in Monterey, it was a pretty considerable group of people. And Myers was one of them as they occupied Monterey, which was at that time, as you know, the capital of California.
Here we have one of Myers' more colorful images of a California Lancer. I'd like for you to take a look at the uniform of this Lancer. It's extremely colorful, very ornate. The saddle is ornate, as well as the saddle blanket. And you'll see, in comparison with the American uniforms, how these uniforms really stand out in Myers's watercolors. For example, this next image, the retreat of the Americans at San Pedro under Captain Mervine, you notice all of the uniforms look kind of drab, but to the right we have the California soldiers, and they stand out in the graphic. Now, with regard to this particular image, Stockton left less than 40 men in Los Angeles under the command of Archibald Gillespie. And Gillespie's rule was pretty heavy-handed, and the California people rebelled. On September 29th, the Californios forced the small American garrison to retire to the harbor. Soon after, 200 reinforcements sent by Stockton under the command of Captain William Mervine arrived, but they were forced to retreat on October 8th in a one-hour battle. Here we have the fight at San Pascual as depicted by Myers. On December 6th, after a long march from Santa Fe, Stephen Watts Kearny and his men arrived in California. The Americans were really confident that they would easily vanquish the California soldiers, but they didn't succeed. After the battle on December 6th, which lasted only half an hour, 21 American soldiers were killed. This was the largest number of American casualties in California during the war.
So in Southern California, what you had was kind of the California population beating the Americans at San Pascual and expelling them from Los Angeles. The San Diego remained kind of a center of people who were in favor of the Americans. And so the American forces retreated there. And then in January, they organized a march north to retake Los Angeles. And this is a picture that Myers drew of the forces, excuse me, under Kearny and Stockton crossing the San Gabriel River, which they did on January 8th, 1847. Once they got across the river, they were engaged by the Mexican forces who were under the command of the California forces, who were under the command of a Mexican officer named Jose Maria Flores. So there's Flores charging Stockton on the San Gabriel River. That particular battle was a draw, and there's Myers' picture of the Americans basically camping there overnight. Well, the next day, January 9th, on the plain between the two rivers, between the San Gabriel River and the Los Angeles River, somewhat near the present city of Vernon, the American forces beat back Flores's charges, and they won the Battle of La Mesa. And this was the last significant engagement in California, in Alta California, during the war. The Californios under Andres Pico surrendered on January 12th, and the Treaty of Cahuenga between Pico and Fremont was signed the next day on January the 13th, 1847.
Now, Myers resigned from the Navy in June 1848. After his return to Philadelphia, he had second thoughts and he attempted to get reinstated a number of times, but his health was so impaired that his requests were turned down. On October 19th, 1850, his wife wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy saying that her husband was physically unable to do further naval service. And that's the last we know about Myers. But you're probably wondering, well, how did we get these beautiful images? Where did they come from? Who found them? We have Franklin Delano Roosevelt to thank for that. Roosevelt is famous for having been a collector of stamps, but he also collected a lot of material relating to the Navy. The collection of Myers' artwork is housed at the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park, New York. And I'd like to read you a few comments that Roosevelt made about Myers' artwork. He said, "In many years of collecting sketches, paintings, and engravings relating to the Navy of the United States, I had found virtually none which had connection with naval operations in the Pacific in 1846 and 1847. When I had the opportunity a few years ago of acquiring the original sketchbook of Gunner William H. Myers, I realized its historical value. Not only do these sketches fill a definite gap in the history of this nation and of our sister Republic of Mexico, but they also throw an interesting light on the conduct of land and naval warfare less than 100 years ago. So if you want to see the originals, go to the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park, New York.
Hyde Park is right on the Hudson River, as you probably know, and Roosevelt actually sailed boats on the Hudson River. And during the First World War, he was actually Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And that was one of the things that really got him interested in collecting these Navy things. He really wanted to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy because the person he called Cousin Theodore, namely Theodore Roosevelt, had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy right before the Spanish-American War. So Roosevelt really had an interest in naval things, and these paintings are a testament to his interest. The second person we're going to be talking about is a man named William Rich Hutton. Now, Hutton was born in 1826 in Washington, D.C. His father, James Hutton, was a clerk at the State Department. And what happened, though, was that his father died, and his mother's brother, whose name was William Rich, started living with them and basically raised him. And what happened was that William Rich, his uncle, was appointed during the Mexican War as a paymaster for the army. And William Rich Hutton, our friend there, went with his uncle as his assistant. So they come to California as paymaster and assistant paymaster. They leave D.C. in January of 1847. They go to Richmond and Mobile, and then across the strait in Panama. When they get to the other side of Panama, they had just missed the boat going north. So what they do, there was no regular service. So they took the first boat that came in, and it happened to be going south. And they took that boat south to Peru. And then in Peru, they found the boat that was going up. And they eventually get to out to California. They get to San Francisco in April the 19th. And they get to Monterey on April the 23rd, 1847.
This first image that we were showing you, La Matanza, is probably very familiar to many of you. You'll see it in all kinds of history books dealing with California. It's a watercolor drawing of the aftermath of the slaughter of cattle. I'm sorry, I know it's happy hour and pre-dinner, and it's a little bit gross, but I'm going to point out, if you notice the four freshly beheaded cattle heads in the foreground, and then you have a carreta, a cart, that will eventually be transporting the dried hides. Here we have row upon row of animal hides that are drying in the sun. And you could get at least 50 of those hides in one of these carretas. And I'd like to point out to the left of the image, you will see that there are some Native American women seated near a tree. Now, many of the workers engaged in the slaughter of cattle and in the process of rendering tallow were Native Americans. If you take a look at the facial features of these workers, you can see that they are Native American workers. Okay.
So Hutton gets to San Francisco on April the 19th, 1847. San Francisco at the time was still called Yerba Buena at the time. There were about, when he got there, maybe 200, 300 people living there. It was kind of a minor outpost. But on July 9th, 1846, the American flag had been raised at Yerba Buena near the customs house on the plaza. And so the name of the boat that did that was the Portsmouth. The Portsmouth was one of those boats that was in Monterey Bay in one of the earlier slides that we showed. And so the plaza, the Mexican plaza, which had the customs house, was renamed Portsmouth Square in honor of the boat. And the boat was captained by John Montgomery. And so the beach little area right there along the shore was named Montgomery, and that eventually evolved into Montgomery Street. Now, Yerba Buena quickly grew with the gold rush from a couple of hundred people to, in 1852, over 35,000 people, according to the state census. So Hutton stayed at the City Hotel, and this on the left is a picture that he drew from the City Hotel, and you can see the boats that are there, actually the houses, and then the boats, and then out on the bay you can see that large island. That's Yerba Buena Island, and during the gold rush, what happened is that squatters raised some goats out there, and so popularly Yerba Buena Island was called Goat Island. So Portsmouth Square, which was the old Mexican Plaza, quickly becomes the center of Gold Rush San Francisco. And that's what it actually looked like in 1851. And now, San Francisco during this time was very, very volatile. When Hutton first got there in 1849, he wrote back to his family in the East, "The price of goods in San Francisco is still high, more so than even when we were here last spring." That was 1849, because at the beginning of the gold rush, there were more potential miners than there were suppliers. And so prices were very high. But that changed very quickly. And Hutton writes less than a year later, he says, "The immense business of San Francisco, with its extravagant rates, is rapidly breaking up. Many firms have failed. And where a room could not be hired for $50 or $80 a month, now numbers of houses are for rent. Real estate is worth only 30 to 40% of what it was in the spring, and a greater fall is anticipated." So San Francisco, like most boom towns, and that's what it was, its economy was very, very volatile. One merchant writing home complained of what he called the inflation of an overdone business. So San Francisco, its quick evolution was amazing, and you can see in the map, though, the map on the left is in the late 1840s, and the map on the right is the early 1850s, and you can see what's happened to the Cove, which had all sorts of wars sticking out. By the early 1850s, that cove is all filled in. That's now downtown San Francisco, and it was filled in basically because, when ships would come bringing potential gold seekers, the crews would desert the ships and head to the gold fields. And so that all of that stuff there underneath the cove is landfill. It's old ships and junk and buildings that kind of collapsed. And you can see the way that the city just immensely developed. And Hutton was a part of that. And he really wanted to try to record that in his drawings. And you can see this is a drawing that he did from the hills above San Francisco, and you can see the cove. The cove on the right there, roughly in the middle, is called Rincon Point, and the on the left, which you can't quite see, is called Clark's Point. And in a couple of years, that whole thing was basically completely filled up. You can see from these pictures, which he took from Rincon Point, that northern part of the cove, you can see the areas that you can see the way that he was very much attentive to detail. The top is his pencil drawing, and the bottom is the watercolor that he drew out of that. And you can see Yerba Buena Island. You can see the houses on it. You can see everything. This is two drawings that he did from Telegraph Hill, which is still an area in San Francisco. It was called Telegraph Hill because it was fairly close to the Golden Gate, and there was a guy stationed there who would signal with flags when a boat was arriving. And when a boat was arriving in Gold Rush, San Francisco in 1851, that was a big, big deal. It was bringing mail and goods and things like that. The top picture, he's looking out over the bay, and you can see Golden Gate there a little bit on the bottom left. But in the bottom picture, you can see he's looking out at Golden Gate, and you can see how underdeveloped that area was. Now that, of course, is the Presidio in San Francisco. So you can see that Hutton was very, very interested. He lived through this tremendous social change, and he was very interested as much as he could in recording that change.
Well, Hutton traveled up and down Alta California, even into the gold area and the gold fields. But Monterey had a special place in his heart, as did Carmel. As you saw in various Myers images, Myers was captivated with the landscape in the Monterey area, just as Hutton was. And here we have several pencil sketches of the vegetation of the area. They're beautiful. They're just so detailed. He also was captivated by the different structures in Monterey. And here we have the customs house. He titles everything. So we have the customs house here. And then we have, he says, the mountain El Gavilan or El Toro. And then down here on the bottom is this word mole, M-O-L-E. And I looked at that, I thought, what? Mole? And I think that's the way he heard the word muelle, which means wharf in Spanish. So for him, it was like mole. Well, mole is something else, but it's the muelle. It's the wharf. Okay. And here we have his view of Monterey from the old fort. Now we've got the custom house again here. And then he points out, he has all of the things listed here. I've just put them in larger for you to see. Here is the church, but this is the Royal Presidio Chapel. And he has a drawing of it. And later on, you'll see that Sully does too. So please keep that in mind as we're going through. Here we have the new 1847 butcher shop. And we have a corral, tent poles. And then over here, we have Larkin's Wharf with the hoist. Here's the hoist. And it's named after Thomas O. Larkin. And this thing right here is the chute that they would use to carry the drinking water to the ships. So I think that's really interesting. And then here he's pointing out the home of William Garner. And William Garner was an Englishman who jumped ship in Santa Barbara in 1824, and he moved to the Monterey area. He lived in California for the next 25 years.
This next thing is a picture from the foot of what is now in Monterey called Calle Principal, the main, basically the main street. And Hutton, what he does is he captions them. So nearest place is called the Astor House, and that was probably a gambling place. In fact, Walter Colton, in his book 3 Years in California, in 1847, says a nest of gamblers arrived in town yesterday, and last evening they opened a Monte. That was a gambling game at the hotel honored with the name of Astor House. Now, the next one is over there on the left is Captain Walton's house, number 3. Well, he was a naval officer from Georgia, and in the middle there's a house that is occupied by Don Manuel Jimeno and Doña Angustias. Doña Angustias, we will see later on, is Angustias de la Guerra. She was the daughter of Jose de la Guerra y Noriega, the major figure in Monterey. So he's kind of interested not only in what it looks like, but he's interested in the social world that these people are inhabiting. Now, this next one is another panorama of Monterey. You can see the Presidio Chapel there in the top left, and then his captions, which are too hard to read. That's General Riley's house. Riley was the military governor of California for a time. Then there's Captain Walton, who we talked about before, and the Astor House. So it's again another view. Riley was, in fact, as you probably know, the military governor who called the Constitutional Convention in Monterey in 1849, which met there and drew up the state constitution. There's here the next slide is he's standing back, just like he did in San Francisco. Went up a hill and tried to get a panorama, and then you can see Monterey from a distance, and you can see the bay and the town there. He also went around the town. This is called the Lavanderia, the Rancheria de las Lavanderas. This is where they did their laundry. This is the estuary, which is now near the Presidio and near the cemetery in Monterey. If you drive into Monterey, there's a little turnoff that you can go. It says estuary, and that's exactly what that was.
Yeah, and the cemetery is over this way. You would see it, yeah. Sorry.
And then finally, what we have is the fort, his uncle was a paymaster for the army, so he was interested in things. And there's a 10 and 24 pounders and 5 pounders, and you can see the flag there is where the old customs house actually was. So he's interested in trying to get as many different kinds of perspectives as he possibly can of this new place and these new types of people and these new social situations which he's never experienced before.
And as we've pointed out in a couple of the other slides, he was interested in the church, which is the Royal Presidio Chapel. And here is his rendering of the Royal Presidio Chapel. And here is a current view, courtesy of our colleague, Dr. Ruben Mendoza at Cal State Monterey Bay. Well, Hutton also was very intrigued by Carmel. And here we have two views of the Carmel mission. So up here, this one's straight on, and down here, the second one is a view into the courtyard, and you see that crumbling wall there. Now, this area today, there's a big fountain in this area, so I think you can orient yourself by kind of thinking about where the fountain is. Here is another view of the mission, and the area right here would be where you would find some of the older headstones, cemetery. Out this way, you head off to the Crespi room, and then there's a kind of a visitor center over this way. Okay.
Hutton also went to Southern California, and during the late 40s and early 50s, in fact, through the 1850s, Los Angeles and Southern California in general remained much more Hispanic than Northern California did. In fact, where you guys are, Santa Barbara was kind of the beginning of the area of California that remained much more Hispanic, both in culture and in terms of social leadership throughout the time. So here's a picture of San Pedro, which then, as now, was the port of Los Angeles. And ethnic issues, since there were some Americans down there, mainly military people, but some others as well. Ethnic issues did persist. And in 1849, Hutton wrote in his diary, "We have just heard a report that the Sonorans, people from the Mexican territory of Sonora, in revenge for being turned out of the mines, are coming to this place to kill all the Americans. And that Urrea, who was a well-known Sonoran general, Urrea will lead them." That quote kind of indicates that the relationship between the newcomer Anglos and the more settled Californios was not always a nice, placid kind of thing. He also went, from San Pedro, he went into Los Angeles, and there he draws parts of Los Angeles. You see on the top left the Pueblo Church, La Placita. It's called, the little plaza there. And you can see in the bottom picture, from another perspective, another part of the town, and then the vineyards in the back. Los Angeles was, during the 1830s and early 1840s, a very, very well-known wine growing area in Alta California. In fact, if you wanted good wine, you would get it from Los Angeles, and Hutton is doing that. He was also, when he was in this is a picture of Fort Moore, which is where the American military was stationed, slightly outside of the old town of Los Angeles. And when Hutton was down there, he also participated in a survey of Los Angeles, a survey which was done by this man, Edward Otho Crisp Moore, Ord. What a great name. Ord is the guy that Fort Ord was named after. He had come out to California in 1849. Actually, he came out on the same boat that another young American lieutenant named William Tecumseh Sherman came out to Monterey on. Ord was, in West Point at the time. Ord and Sherman were both West Point graduates. These guys studied topography and surveying and things like that, because a big part of being an Army officer in the early 1840s, it was projected to be an explorer. And to be an explorer, you had to know how to do surveying, you had to know how to do topography, you had to know how to do these kinds of drawings. And so, by the way, this picture, after the Civil War, Ord was the military commander of Richmond. And this picture was taken while he was military commander of Richmond. And Ord had happened to be at Appomattox. He was on Grant's staff. And a number of the American military officers, after Lee left, took souvenirs of things at Appomattox. And that particular table that Ord has got his hand on, that is the table that Robert E. Lee signed the surrender at Appomattox after the Smithsonian finally got it back from Ord. But that was his souvenir. I don't know how he snuck it out, but he did sneak it out. And there it is. Well, anyway, Ord did the first survey of Los Angeles. And you can see his name there on the top right of the picture. And he was assisted by Hutton, whose name is right underneath Ord. And that is the first survey done in the American era of Los Angeles. And it basically is the survey that set the settlement patterns for Los Angeles during the remainder, basically, of the 20th century. Or there's a couple of more pictures that he did that Hutton did of Los Angeles, and you can see, just like remember those pictures of San Francisco, he had his sketch, which is on the top, the pencil sketch, and then he turned it into watercolors. And you can see one of the things that he and many other American military people were so impressed was the landscape of California. In the second, in the watercolor picture, what really stands out are the mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains back there, and they are, he had, for him, the Allegheny Mountains were big, and the Rockies and the Sierras just dwarfed them. And they were just amazed and awed by them, and they wanted to try to capture that amazement and that awe in the pictures that he did.
Well, Hutton went to Santa Barbara, and I think these images will resonate with all of you who are watching this from Santa Barbara. Here is a view of Santa Barbara from the anchorage. Looks very different than today, and he focuses on the mission, as you can see in the center of this pencil sketch. Here we have another pencil sketch of Mission Santa Barbara, 1848, and then we have the watercolor rendering. Here is the Mission Santa Barbara from the hill. This is his caption in 1852, and it says, "Island of Santa Cruz, visible in the distance 25 miles away." Okay. And then he was also he's a future engineer. He was very interested in the waterworks. And this is from 1847. Now, after his stint in Alta California, Hutton goes back east. During the Civil War, he worked on the Washington Aqueduct, and in the 1870s and 1880s, he was busy with several engineering projects in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area. In 1886, he became the consulting engineer for the new Croton Aqueduct, and I like their slogan, "To quench the thirst of New Yorkers." I think that's absolutely great. He then relocated to New York in 1880 to work as chief engineer for the Washington Bridge project in 1888 and 1889. And here is a contemporary photo of the bridge over the Harlem River. He also was the chief engineer for the Hudson River Tunnel from 1889 to 1891. The tunnel was completed in 1908 and it opened in 1910. And here we have two images of William Rich Hutton, the young boy, and the very, very accomplished engineer that he became.
Well, the last person that we're going to talk about is Alfred Sully. Now, Alfred Sully was the son of a very, very famous portrait painter in early 19th century America named Thomas Sully. Now, you may have never heard of Thomas Sully at all, but I would be willing to wager that a number of you probably have one of Thomas Sully's drawings in your pocket because he did the portrait of Andrew Jackson that appears on the on which the portrait of Jackson on the $20 bill is based. So he was a very, very well-known portrait painter. So if you have a $20 bill, we're going to get Andrew Jackson is going to leave the $20 bill in the next couple of years. So Sully will not be as as prominent in our wallets as he is right now, and he's going to be replaced by Harriet Tubman. But Sully was very, very well known, and his son Alfred basically went to West Point and was a lieutenant during the Mexican War. And this section from the New York Times in 1914 has a picture of Sully at the top there, that again was drawn by his father, and some drawings that Sully did during his service in the Mexican War. He himself was a self-taught artist. Alfred was. He started drawing at the age of 6, probably trying to be like his dad, and he was turning out credible watercolors in Philadelphia. By the time he was 13 years old. But whereas Dad was a portrait painter, Alfred seems to have been more attracted to doing landscapes and seascapes and animals and outdoor types of things. He graduated from West Point in 1841 and served in the Mexican War. And after the Mexican War ended, he was ordered to do garrison duty in California. He arrives in Monterey in April of 1849, so after the war was basically over, and just as the gold rush is beginning, and he's assigned as quartermaster. So for the next 4 years, he lives in California. He lives in Monterey. He lives for a while at the military installation in Benicia, and he takes frequent visits to San Francisco and, as we shall see, to Santa Barbara. During his years as an officer, he witnessed that major population and social change that the others, that Hutton had witnessed. He witnessed California coming from a Mexican, from a very, very primitive American territory into a major state.
Now, soon after landing in Monterey, Sully met Angustias de la Guerra, whose Spanish-born father, José de la Guerra y Noriega, had been the commander at the Santa Barbara Presidio. Angustias' husband, Manuel Jimeno Casarín, whom she married in 1833 when she was just 18 years old, was a member of the governor's staff in Monterey before the American forces occupied the town in 1846. Angustias had long and close ties to the Anglos. Among her in-laws were the American merchant Alfred Robinson and the English trader William Edward Petty Hartnell. Both of these men became Catholics and Mexican citizens before marrying into Angustias' family. Angustias was friendly with many of the American officers, and she saw no reason to behave differently, even though she did fear that the new regime would bring some difficult changes to her country. Angustias and Manuel Jimeno had what I would say was a strained marriage. They were at odds over financial and family matters, and they would eventually separate before Manuel died in 1853. On October 31st, 1856, in San Francisco, Angustias married Dr. James L. Ord, an Army physician and the brother of Lieutenant Ord, the man who took that table as a souvenir. Now, here we have the city of Monterey in 1842 showing the Jimeno house. I have it labeled here, and the Larkin house, and then the Stokes adobe. Any of you who are really familiar with Monterey may have been to the Stokes adobe in the early 2000s when it was a restaurant. Now it's not, I believe. Here we have the Casa Jimeno, and as the caption says, it was Monterey's social center. But now it's the site of the Marriott Hotel, sadly. But I think that you can see the scope of the house, how large it was, and Angustias and Manuel did a lot of entertaining there. Officers such as Sully found Angustias to be a very gracious hostess who looked after them. She cared about them. She wanted to make sure they were well fed. He wrote in a letter to his sister Blanche that a number of the officers actually boarded at her house at various times. I like his description of Angustias. He says, "She is a tall, majestic looking woman, about 30 or 35, remarkably handsome, very agreeable, very good-natured, and very smart. In fact, she is a well-read woman and would grace any circle of society. That's high praise. Now, this next image is Sully's painting of a street in Monterey, and he is featuring the cuartel, which is the barracks here on the right. Sully wrote in another letter to Blanche, and he said that since Angustias's husband was away, she had no males in the house, and so she felt, temporarily it would be helpful to have some males in the house to assist with chores, etc. And he refers to Angustias as mi madre. He's starting to learn more Spanish, and he peppers his letters to Blanche with Spanish. He says, mi madre. That is the name she calls herself, though she is rather young and handsome to have so old a boy as me. She requested that I make her house my home. And he did. He stayed there for quite some time. And that is where Sully met Angustias' eldest daughter named Manuela. She was 15 years old at the time that he met her. He describes her as remarkably pretty and gay. She dances and sings and plays the guitar. And like all Spanish girls, she is monstrous fond of flirtation. I fear she finds this rather a hard job with me because my bad Spanish sets her a-laughing. However, that don't prevent me from having a very agreeable time of it, for she has a good figure, a good foot and ankle, small hands, brilliant black eyes, white teeth, red cheeks, and she is as lively as a cricket. He was falling for her and falling bad. Sully sent a daguerreotype of Manuela to his father, who painted this miniature that I have here on the screen. But Sully wasn't super happy with it. He complained that his father had not captured her smile. He said, "It is not quite smiling enough." But when you think about the poor woman having to sit for a daguerreotype, it takes a long time. She probably had that big smile, and then you're getting tired sitting, and then it becomes something small, and that's what it ended up in the portrait. But I do like the fact that there is an image of Manuela. Now, Sully, as I said, he fell hard. He was in love with Manuela, and he wanted to marry her. Earlier, I mentioned that you might be seeing another image of the Royal Presidio chapel. Sorry, you can compare that with Hutton's. Manuela had many suitors, and Sully was really afraid he was going to lose her. He also feared that her parents would object to the marriage because, as he wrote, "I have nothing to offer except my good family background and my good reputation." Well, when he asked Angustias and Manuel Jimeno for permission to discuss marriage with Manuela, believe it or not, they agreed because they thought that Manuela was just going to flirt with him and just sort of play games like that, and that she would refuse the proposal. Also, they had planned on having her marry a wealthy relative. Much to their surprise, Manuela accepted Sully's marriage proposal. Oh my God. Her parents and many Mexicans in town objected to this marriage because Sully was not a Catholic. They liked him a lot, but he was not a Catholic, and he didn't have any intention of converting to Catholicism. He said to his sister Blanche, "The whole of Monterey has turned against me and used all arguments and invested all kinds of lies to assist the parents and oppose our union, which had no other effect on the girl than to make her more firm." Well, Sully, as I said, had no intention of converting to Catholicism, but he still wanted to marry her. He wanted to elope. And I think he could have had a career as a wedding planner if he lived today, because he planned this out perfectly, as you will see. He had a friend ride to San Francisco to obtain a dispensation from Bishop Gonzalez Rubio for a Catholic to marry a non-Catholic. In the meantime, while the friend was going up to San Francisco and then riding back, Sully started to make arrangements so that he and Manuela could get married in Monterey. And what he did was he arranged with Captain Elias Kane and his wife to allow them to have the wedding there at their home. So as soon as his friend returned from San Francisco, this is what happened. This is the choreography of the wedding ceremony. First, Sully arranged for Manuela to be invited to the Kane home on Monday, May 20th. Angustia said okay. She agreed to let her daughter go as long as she was accompanied by a chaperone, and that chaperone happened to be a young man who admired Manuela. Then Sully hid in some bushes outside of the home along with the priest. Can you imagine these two guys hiding behind some boxwoods or something? Oh my God. They were there waiting to get a sign that it was time to come in. Now, one thing about the priest, you're probably thinking, why would he perform this wedding ceremony? Well, the only reason he was going to do it was because of that dispensation that Sully had obtained. Sully arranged for another friend of his to drop by accident and to distract the chaperone, so get that guy out of the scene. Then Mrs. Kane escorted Manuela into the kitchen. Then someone waved a white flag that Sully and the priest could see as a sign for them to hurry up and come into the kitchen. 5 minutes later, Sully and Manuela were married. It was probably the fastest wedding ceremony on record. So they were married. Sully's happy, Manuela's happy, but not the parents. That grim look on Angustias's face, it's an older image of her, but I think she probably had that same look on her face when she found out that her daughter had married Sully. Sully said, he wrote to Blanche, he said, her parents were as mad as hell at him. And when he went to see them, they said, do not ever show your face in this house again. Her parents kept all of Manuela's belongings, even her clothing. Now, all the army wives, they really like Manuela, and they really love this whole story of them getting married at the Kane home. So they decided to help Manuela by seeing that she was always well dressed. The officers even held a ball for Manuela and Sully. Sully wrote, Mrs. Willie and Mrs. Kane went to work and dressed Manuela. They felt the same pride that I did in wanting to make her appear beautiful, and they quite succeeded. Her dress cost $100, and that was before it was even made up. Everybody said she looked beautiful. Of course, I thought so too. Now, coincidentally, William Rich Hutton was in Monterey at the time of this marriage. And he wrote to his mother in September of 1850, and he said, Manuelita's marriage has caused a great deal of ill feeling here in Monterey. Well, a few months later, I guess Angustias had settled down, and she decided to send clothing to her daughter, sent her clothes, as well as some expensive gifts, such as a satin bedspread that was embroidered with silk and lace-bordered linen sheets. Sully wrote that the bedspread must have cost $200, and he says, they can't be that mad, so I guess they weren't. Manuela's parents agreed to a reconciliation when they learned that Manuela was pregnant. I guess a future grandchild kind of helps you change your mind about things. They wanted Sully to resign from the army and settle down. And to facilitate this, they were willing to give him part of their rancho. And this is the rancho house that they owned. Manuela's father persuaded Sully to take a 2-mile square section of the rancho and develop it, and he agreed. Now, Sully built a sawmill on his land, and he was looking for a spot to build a flour mill. On the very day that he found that spot, while he was headed back to Monterey, a messenger caught up with him and told him that Manuela had just given birth to a baby boy. She was attended to in her delivery by her mother and by 2 older women, since there was no doctor within 30 miles. They named the boy Thomas Manuel Sully, after both of his grandfathers. Sully began to contemplate his future in California as a rancher. And he said he was truly happy for the first time since he had left home. On March 27th, 1851, less than 2 weeks after giving birth, Manuela became violently ill after eating an orange that was given to her by a former suitor. It was rumored that the man, maybe because of jealousy or that he was spurned, or maybe he hated Sully, it was rumored that he had poisoned the fruit. Manuela suffered terribly and she died a violent death the following day. The orange and the suitor were blamed, but it was possible that she had contracted cholera. The final blow for Sully came on April 14th. Angustias, who was probably 35, 36 years old at the time, she had recently given birth. So here she's a mom again and a grandmother. And she was taking care of Manuela's baby boy. That night, the night of April 14th, when she took little Thomas to bed with her to nurse him, she fell asleep with the baby in her arms. When she woke up the next day, she found that he had died. Angustias had accidentally strangled the baby in her sleep. Dr. Ord, who would become her future husband, told Angustias that the baby had died of a convulsion, but he told Sully, and only Sully, the truth. Sully was just a broken man. He couldn't even attend the funeral. He wrote to his family, "I have been robbed of a treasure that can never be replaced. I shall leave this place as soon as I can. I will give up my rancho and my mill, for I have no intention now of leaving the army. Before I leave, I shall erect a tomb to mark the grave of my wife and my child. The slab with this inscription I expect soon from San Jose. From San Francisco." Whoops, where is the inscription? It's not appearing. 1 second. I'm sorry. There it is. Got it. Technological problem. Excuse me. This is the inscription that he had put on the tombstone. It's in Spanish on the right, in English on the left. This story is so tragic, and if you think about what Angustias was going through at the time, here she's a new mom, she's lost her daughter, she's taking care of her grandson, the grandson dies. Emotionally, psychologically, I don't know how she could handle it, and I don't know how that Sully could handle it either. It's a story that nobody could even make up for a telenovela, but it's true. It happened. This story really touched my heart, and I wanted to find the gravestone uh, of Manuela and little Thomas. 2 years ago, when Bob retired from teaching at Santa Clara, his department, the history department, very generously gave him a gift certificate to the Seven Gables Inn in Pacific Grove. And so we decided, oh, let's spend our anniversary there. So the being the two research nerds that we are, we thought, let's combine our anniversary celebration with some research we have to do at the archives in Monterey. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to look on Find a Grave and see if I can find where this grave really is of Manuela and little baby Thomas. And so I did find out that it was in the San Carlos Cemetery. So on our actual anniversary, we went to the cemetery and we found the grave thanks to the help of this really wonderful assistant of ours here pictured in the middle, the groundskeeper. He knew where the grave was and he wanted to clean it up for us so that we could see it. And here on the right is the tombstone of Manuela Jimeno and her baby. Now, Sully left California in 1854 a broken man, forever marked by the tragedy of losing his beloved Manuela and their son. He began frontier service on the northern plains, building or repairing forts in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Nebraska. The proximity of Indian encampments to the forts inspired his paintings of Sioux Indians, including this representation of Sioux maidens, and that is the title that he gave this painting. While serving at Fort Pierre in what is now South Dakota, Sully fathered a daughter by a Sioux woman. The daughter was named Mary Sully, also known as Akisitawin, which means soldier woman. Sully rose to the rank of brigadier general during the first half of the Civil War. After the war ended, he was assigned to Fort Vancouver, and he spent time in campaigns against Indians there and in Idaho. By 1873, he had begun to develop rheumatism and arthritis, and he was no longer able to go out in the field. He was made post commander at Fort Vancouver, and it was there that he began painting again. Sadly, in 1879, pneumonia took the life of the old soldier. And here we have our three artists. We are preparing a book about military artists in California, and it's been such a pleasure to be able to share our research about these three men with you. And I hope that you have found their stories to be as fascinating and in some cases heart-wrenching as we have. So here we have Myers, Hutton, and Sully.
Yeah, and the stories are important because they chronicle from three very, very different kinds of perspectives. They chronicle the transition from Mexican to U.S. California, a very important transition. And they chronicle it from perspectives that are not the typical perspectives. You know, these aren't Gold Rush diaries, and these aren't, you know, pictures of miners panning for gold and things like that. These are people who had a foot in both camps, in the Mexican California camp and in the American camp. And the way that they bring their stories together and the perspectives that they try to talk about are really important, and we think throw a unique light on the history of California during this transitional period.